Good afternoon. My name is Attorney General Jeff Landry from the state of Louisiana, and I'm also the chairman of the Republican Attorney Generals Association. We have constantly reminded the American people that we represent and stand up for the rule of law. As such, we believe that the voting system should be free of outside undue influence and that irregularities in the process should be completely vetted so the American people can have faith in their system of electing officials. In this particular case, we believe it's akin to the referees getting to change the rules of the game midway through the football game. And being that we're in football season, I think every American can understand and appreciate that. And we believe that's exactly what the Pennsylvania Supreme Court did. The referees, which are the judges, don't get to write the rules. That's the legislature. And unfortunately here, we believe that the Pennsylvania Supreme Court did exactly that by rewriting the law. Once all legitimate votes are counted and irregularities are corrected, then irrespective of who the president is, we will continue to ensure that the rule of law is protected. At this time, I would like to bring up Attorney General Eric Schmidt of Missouri, who led this particular brief. General.
Thank you, Jeff. Again, Attorney General Eric Schmidt, I want to thank everybody for being here. Free and fair elections are the cornerstone of our republic, and it's one of the reasons why the United States is the envy of the world. We have to ensure that every legal vote cast is counted and that every illegal vote cast is not counted. To do so would disenfranchise millions of Americans, and why we filed this brief today seeking the Supreme Court to take the Pennsylvania case and then reverse the Pennsylvania Supreme Court's decision. And there's a couple of key issues that we highlight in our brief. The first is a separation of powers issue. Under the election clauses of the United States Constitution, the power is specifically granted to state legislatures to direct time, place, and manner frameworks for their state's elections. That happened in Pennsylvania. And after a lot of deliberation and a lot of debate, the Pennsylvania General Assembly expanded mail-in voting options, but made very clear as an important safeguard that all ballots should be received on election day. The Pennsylvania Supreme Court rewrote that law. And so as the court overstepped their bounds and encroached on the legislature's authority, that's one of the issues we bring up. How did they do that? Well, they created an overtime. They extended the period of time in which those ballots can be received. In fact, they said if they're postmarked on election day, or even if they're not postmarked at all, if they're received several days after the election, they can be counted. We believe that this is a violation of a very important principle of federalism and our separation of powers, that they overstep their bounds. The second is election integrity in its broadest sense. That we have to maintain, people have to have confidence in their elections. And a decades-old warning, mail-in balloting is the most likely form of fraud that you'll see. That goes back to the bipartisan Carter-Baker Commission, the DOJ and their guidance. They have that listed, and we cite in this brief hundreds of examples, or we cite several examples, but there are hundreds of examples across the country, that the most likely way to commit fraud is through ballot fraud. And there's a case most recently in Missouri that we cite where a local official, in fact, was indicted for that. And so a lot of the arguments that we use in our brief that have been joined by 9 other states, that has been filed, I think, within the last hour or two, we used in Missouri to maintain the integrity of our elections as they were challenged in the past few months. This potential for fraud is exacerbated by what the Pennsylvania Supreme Court did when they rewrote the law, by saying that you don't even have to have a postmarked ballot on election day, and it can be received 3 days later, creates conditions that are ripe for fraud and abuse. And so those are the arguments that are made. We are seeking the Supreme Court to take this case. We think it's a very, very important case in the broadest sense, and ultimately overturn the Pennsylvania Supreme Court. So that's a summary of our arguments in the brief. And it's now my pleasure to introduce my good friend from the great state of Oklahoma, General Mike Hunter.
Thank you, General Schmidt. The actions by the Pennsylvania Supreme Court are one of the most breathtaking abuses of judicial authority that I've seen in my 4+ years as Attorney General. When the United States Constitution makes it clear that state legislatures have the constitutional authority to establish the time, place, and manner of elections, and a state Supreme Court completely ignores that constitutional directive, we as attorneys general and we as chief legal officers of our state have a responsibility to address that kind of judicial abuse of authority because of the precedents, the precedent that decision represents. It can affect the outcome of elections, not only in Pennsylvania, but national elections. So as General Schmidt and General Landry have said, the court's attempt to literally rewrite the statute and apply the most amorphous standards for the means in which individuals can mail in their ballots. No attention to the verification of postmarks. In fact, one of the things the Pennsylvania Supreme Court did was provide a presumption that any ballot that they receive that's received within this time frame was legitimately postmarked before Election Day. So it's important to have certainty. It's certainly important to allow people the ability to vote. That is not only a right, it's a responsibility. And so to ignore the fact that you're potentially diluting the votes of people who responsibly, thoughtfully, and faithfully ensured that their votes were either cast in person or cast by mail in a fashion that ensured the ballot was going to be received by Election Day is not only bad law, it's bad policy. So we're here again on behalf of the constituents in our respective states to ensure that the rule of law is being protected, and this kind of, judicial encroachment into the appropriate United States constitutionally directed role of legislators is addressed, and we're very hopeful the Supreme Court will take up this case.
Thank you all. I think we're going to open it up for questions right now. A few questions. Again, what we're doing today is important for everyone to recognize. What the Republican Attorney Generals are doing are an amici, right? It's a friend of the court. We are weighing in on a case, on a writ that has been brought to the U.S. Supreme Court in order to bring additional arguments before the court as to why we believe the court should take up this matter.
Sure. Why does the outcome of this case matter beyond just this specific case to other states? And I think it's an important question. The integrity of our elections are at stake. People having full faith that their vote counts and that it's not diluted by illegal votes, and important principles of the separation of powers. I mean, the Constitution is very clear that it designates to state legislatures the ability to designate time, place, and manner frameworks for elections. And that's what Pennsylvania did. They did that, and they said that all ballots need to be received on Election Day. And the Pennsylvania Supreme Court rewrote that and said, we're going to give it a little bit more time for ballots to come in. And oh, by the way, they don't even need to be postmarked by Election Day. So we think that this is a very important case, not just for this election, but beyond, that the legislatures have the ability to continue to set those time, place, and manner restrictions. And also, when you have that kind of framework that has been set up by the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, it certainly opens the door and makes it ripe for fraud.
Again, I believe the question is as to whether or not myself or any other attorney generals, Republican attorney generals, are looking into voter fraud. Is that, I believe, was that the question? Yeah. Look, I think first of all, it's important to recognize and define what we're talking about when we're talking about voter fraud, right? As General Smith just eloquently said, the question becomes, if ballots are received after 8 p.m., if the law is unambiguous, if it's clear and it says, and the legislature in Pennsylvania said, that ballots shall be returned up until 8 p.m. Any ballot received after 8 p.m. is an illegal ballot. Whether or not you would define that as a fraudulent activity or not would, in my opinion, be based upon who is returning the ballot and whether someone is trying to dump ballots into Pennsylvania after 8 p.m. in a nefarious way. Again, I think these are all irregularities, and regardless of whether a vote is considered voter fraud or if the vote has been taken outside of the scope of law, those are illegal votes and should not be counted. And I think that that's an important reminder for all of the press to keep under consideration. Is we want to make sure that, based upon the irregularities that we're seeing, based upon the way we're seeing courts overstep and basically take the position of legislatures, is problematic. And we hope that the United States Supreme Court would weigh in. Well, again, look, what we're here today to talk about is the election process and to make sure that every American out there understands that Republican AGs want to ensure that every legal vote is counted and that irregularities inside the system are vetted. In addition to that, if the question is, what exactly could the American people look to Republican AGs if, in fact, Vice President Biden becomes the president? I think that what you would see is the same thing you saw from Republican AGs under former President Barack Obama. If a President Biden, if that is the case, is elected and becomes aggressive towards rolling back some of the great changes that President Trump put in place, like deregulating things, allowing our businesses to grow, and then try to implement additional regulations on businesses in an unconstitutional manner, I think you would see Republican AGs take a stand and basically take those issues to court if they're stepping outside of their constitutional authority.
Well, could you repeat it? I'm sorry. Well, the Supreme Court makes decisions based on their timeframes. We're hopeful that they'll act quickly on this. You know, one of the things that I'd like to say, and I'd like to be very clear about, we need to have election rules, and those rules need to balance the interests and the responsibility that states have to ensure that people have access to the ballot box. At the same time, you've got to have laws that protect the security of voting. And so we can't have this view that anybody should be able to vote anytime they want to in any method that they choose to. And so that is not consistent with, again, this approach that we need to take to ensuring access to the ballot box and at the same time ensuring voter security. So, you know, we can avoid, and I hope we'll avoid, a discussion about Bush versus Gore, but the crux of the decision in that case was the arbitrariness of the vote counting in Florida. And so similarly, we've got an arbitrary decision by the highest court in the state of Pennsylvania that ignores black letter statutory law and the United States Constitution. And so that's the focus of our approach to what's happened in Pennsylvania. And I want everybody to understand that this is a rule of law approach that is reflected by our concern that this is a horrible precedent. This is not a political exercise.
The question is, some analysts have opined that these votes wouldn't matter to the, I guess, the final outcome. Is that the question? Well, that's beside the point. I mean, I don't know that to be true. I don't know if anybody knows that to be true. The Secretary of State had given guidance to separate these ballots. Whether or not that was followed, we don't know that to be true right now. Justice Alito on Friday evening, I believe, issued an order making sure that those are being separated. Hopefully that's being done. But beyond just the outcome, the principle is very important, that the legislature is given the authority by the United States Constitution to create a framework by which elections are going to be held. And they spoke very clearly. For the purpose of election integrity, they wanted to make sure all the ballots are counted on election day. That's what we do in Missouri. We have notarization requirements. Those are all those things that states can, and every state's a little bit different. But when the legislature weighs in here, that's who's supposed to weigh in here. And when the Pennsylvania Supreme Court comes in and changes the law, rewrites the law outside of their authority, that's the issue. And also the other issue is that kind of circumstance makes this very open to fraud and should concern everybody in this country.
Yes, I think that we're going to be looking at all of the cases that are filed around the country regardless of whether it would be by the particular state GOP or the Trump campaign. And we'll look at those on a case-by-case basis and basically confer with our membership to determine whether or not we move forward to follow amicis in those cases as well. So again, this was a case that was brought to our attention. We've had a number of AGs that were interested and felt very strongly that the rule of law should be upheld and that the United States Supreme Court should absolutely weigh in to rein in out of control state Supreme Courts when they step outside of their boundaries.
So the premise of that question, I think, is flawed. There's been involvement in the state court proceedings in Pennsylvania involving Republican attorneys generals through an amici process prior to this. So we weighed in, many of us weighed in an amicus brief through the state proceeding, arguing that the Pennsylvania Supreme Court should defer to the legislature. So this isn't a de novo process. We were concerned about the Pennsylvania decision. We think, again, it's horrible precedent. And our hope is the Supreme Court will address it and ensure that state courts understand that they need to follow the United States Constitution with regard to the administration of federal elections.
I have not spoken to Attorney General Josh Shapiro. Okay, final question. We don't. I have no information, General Schmidt, General Hunter. We don't. And I would tell you that if they aren't, that is problematic in and of itself. Again, look, we can only govern based upon a set of rules. And the people who set those rules are legislatures, right? Our three branches of government exist and operate in different spheres, each of them having an important but unique role. When we commingle that, or when one branch overtakes another, the basic civics falls apart. And that's what we have here. And of course, again, if the court went out and ordered Pennsylvania to segregate those ballots, and they did not, it would be problematic. Oh. Anyone? Okay. All right. Thank you all. We do appreciate it. Appreciate your time.